this is going to be a very short video just to show you how to do grid overlays for CAS in DCS over satellite images. So why would we want to do that? Well, one common scenario is we have a complex CAS environment or the target environment like this. This is the Millerville target complex in the NTTR. And we want to put a grid overlay over a little satellite photo that we can give to JTACs, FACS, and the pilots so they have a common reference grid to describe where things are. Now, when you want to do this over a map, this is very easy because you can capture the map from the mission editor or any mapping software and it's got grid lines on it. And if you need smaller grids, you can align them with the existing grid lines. The problem we have in DCS is that when we capture these images from in the game engine, we don't have the grid lines. Now, we can go into the F10 map and capture something that looks like a satellite image, which is sometimes okay for mapping type images. But as you can see, what we're seeing here is completely different to what we're seeing here. So if we want the actual game view with clouds, with buildings, with place structures, those kind of things, with damage, then we need to capture from in the game engine. But how do we then put the grid over and make sure that it's aligned with the MGRS grid? Now, you can do a lot of manual, tinkering around with these, but there's a very quick workflow that lets you do this very quickly and reliably. Now, to do this, we're going to use three tools. We can use DCS, we can use any screen capture, screenshot program, including the free one that comes with Windows. Anything will do. And we're going to use a photo editor that supports layers and transparency. And either it needs an auto align feature, we're going to use Photoshop's auto align feature, or it needs to be able to set transparency or a blend mode that lets you manually align the layers. We'll show you how to do both. This is really quick and it's really simple. So what are we going to do first? The first thing we're going to do is capture our image that's going to let us align the grid lines. So it needs to be, obviously big enough to include some grid lines. So that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to capture the whole of the Paparov 37 grid square. We're going to grab it there and we're going to drop it into Photoshop. Now, one thing is that when you go into Photoshop and create a new image, if you've got something in the clipboard, it will tell you that one of the options is to make the image the clipboard size. Don't do that because you've just captured the biggest image and it's only 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels. If you then, we're going to zoom in on one tiny part of it, that tiny part will be 50 by 50 pixels or something and will be useless. So we need to go up at least a factor of 10, and I would suggest a factor of 100. So we're going to do a 10,000 pixel by 10,000 pixel square image. And yes, it's going to be massive. 8-bit RGB, standard settings. It doesn't need to be particularly high quality, especially if you're trying to simulate satellite imagery. And the DPI resolution, obviously, because we're only working in software, is completely irrelevant. So we're going to go ahead and create that, and it's going to chew through a whole load of memory. So we've got a background layer. We're just going to do two more layers. We're going to delete the background just because we don't need the background. And then what we're going to do is we're going to drop in our reference image. And the first thing we're going to do is scale the reference image up to the whole square. So just keyboard shortcuts. So I'll tell you what I'm doing. Hold down Shift, scale, and it gives you this. It doesn't have to align. It doesn't matter. Let's do that. Okay, better. So we're going back to Photoshop. That's our top reference image. Now, what we want to do is we want to capture a view that looks, something like this, right? But if you just capture directly to this very small area, you're going to have difficulty aligning the layers. So what we're going to do is we're going to use an intermediate stage. So the next image we're going to capture is going to be this bit. And then we're going to drop that in Photoshop as a new layer. And we're going to put it down here. And we're just going to, just because this makes the auto align feature work a tiny bit better, we're just going to kind of very roughly make it the right size. So it looks just quickly by eye that these features and those features are roughly the same size. And then I hope we're going to get away with 3 layers. We might need 4. We're going to go in and capture the actual bit that we want, but this time we're going to do it in the game engine. Now, try and keep this orthogonal, so don't use the mouse to pan around. You want Photoshop to be matching top downs to top downs generally, So we're a little bit far north actually there. Just move the centroid a little bit. Okay, let's try again. That looks good. Yeah, okay. And capture there. Let's use that. Back to Photoshop and drop that in as layer 4. So we've got 3 layers, and you can see how we've done that. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the bottom 2 layers. And to stop stuff moving around, sometimes when Photoshop does auto align, it's pretty good at working out which thing it's supposed to be keeping still and which thing it's going to be supposed to be moving. But if you just want to make sure it does that, just lock the layer you don't want it to move. So Control/, lock the bottom layer, set both layers, edit, auto align layers, use the auto projection, click OK. It'll have a think. There we go. It's aligned them, right? And you can see switching the top and bottom layer on and off. It's done a pretty good job, right? That is pretty close. If you want to check, we're going to put the blend mode in difference. There we go. And you should essentially see complete black, right? So any difference pixels will now be highlighted in white. And this is a way also of checking if your aligns worked, or if you want to manually align something, you can use difference mode. And then you can move this top layer and you can see there that it's gone, you get more white as you get more difference, okay? The other way, obviously, of aligning is to use a normal blend mode and to set some opacity, and then zoom in, and you can see the top layer and the bottom layer, and you can manually align them like that, right? So numerous ways of doing this. Auto, opacity, or blending all work, but what you're looking for is something that's aligned. Now, to be fair, Photoshop is probably better than you are at doing this most of the time, but sometimes you'll need to do a little bit of manual tweaking. Right, normal blend mode. And then what we're going to do is lock this layer. We're going to select those 2 layers, and then we're going to do exactly the same. Image, edit, auto align layers, normal, okay, does some thinking, boom, there it is, happy days. And now you can see if you cut out the intermediate layer, you've got the top layer pretty much bang on, barring, there's going to be a tiny bit of perspective distort at the corners because of the sort of lensing effects and the slant ranges, but that is as close, as you're going to get that if we put the intermediate layer on and we start to play with the opacity of just the top layer. You'll see that is, that's close enough for anything you'd want to do with a visual CAS talk on, right? I mean, maybe it's not going to generate a 10-digit targetable grid, but I don't see, any real difference there in the locations of stuff. So we've done our images, and now at this point, obviously, if you want to do black and white or do some effects to simulate this being a satellite image or whatever, this is where you can do it. You can drop your layers on, text, labels, yada, yada, yada. Right, okay. Or you can export just the graphic and then do those labelings in another program. And quite often what we do is export. I just make the graphic look the way I want, export just the JPEG, put that into my briefing slides, and then I do the labeling in Word or in PowerPoint, just because then the labels are quicker to edit. So here we go. We've got that. Now, how do we put the grid on? Well, I'm going to link to a video about how to make a grid as a Photoshop object, as a JPEG. You can make a grid in Photoshop. It's actually really simple. And basically it involves just drawing 2 black lines on a small image and then applying that image as a pattern over the top of an empty layer, and it gives you a grid. So there's other people have explained how to do this better than me. I've already got one. I've got a grid Photoshop. And what I'm going to do, a grid PSD file, I'm going to drag this grid PSD, which is a 10 by 10 grid. I'm going to drag it into here. And I'm just going to place it like that. It doesn't matter where I place it. And it's the top layer. And then I'm going to set the blend mode to darken or darker color. It doesn't matter in this case because it's black's the same. And that's just going to knock out over the blacks, right? And I'm going to stretch my 10 by 10 grid. Don't worry about trying to keep it square. Nobody cares. we're going to set it to be over the grid square here, right? So we're going to put the, as best we can, center of the black lines over the corners. And then we're going to do the same here. You notice it's only got, because these are designed to sit next to each other, it's only got black lines on the top and left. So this corner is kind of there, right? Not over the grid lines. This is a level of precision that you probably don't really care about most of the time for CAS. There we go. So there's our big grid overlaid. It's exactly overlaid. Now, if you, for some reason, doing this over a very large area, undo that. I'm just going to lock that layer as well. If you do this over a very large area, what you'll find is that you'll have perspective distortion. So if this grid, for example, was going over, hundreds of kilometers, which I suppose if you're doing a grid reference system for like a air-to-air engagement, something might be something you need. This won't be square, and so you'll have to use the image adjustment in perspective to actually bend the grid lines. But most of the time, the problem people have is trying to do small areas, not big ones, because big ones you can just use the grid in DCS or off a mapping program, right? You wouldn't be doing this with a satellite photo of an area hundreds of kilometers across. So over these distances that we're interested in, these grids are essentially square, right? DCS has a flat world, and even if this was the real world, the amount of perspective distortion, the amount of bend caused by, projection distortion over this is absolutely tiny. And then what we're going to do, once we've done the big grid, is we're going to go in and put our little grids, and we're just literally going to duplicate the grid object. So copy, paste, there we go. We've got another grid. It's massive. Actually, let's just lock the big one. That's locked. Grab the little one and make the little one, little, right? And we're going to chuck him into a square. And we're going to do exactly the same thing of any of these grid squares that we are interested in. So we'll go down here. We'll line him up. Like I say, he's got black lines on the top and left, so middle to middle. He's got no black lines on the bottom right. So just inside like that, depending on the thickness of your line. I mean, I suppose line thickness here is kind of irrelevant. There we go. And once we've done that, we can switch off the big grid. Oh, that's interesting. He's rotated. Oh well. Let's just make him this edge then. Looks good. Switch off the big grid, take you, copy, paste. Copy, paste, there we go. Got another grid, auto align, or just use the smart guides. Grab both of you, copy, paste. Got two more grids, auto align, or use the smart guides, or whatever. Job done, got a grid, there we go. Big grid, grid squares. So your whole grid covers Papa Alpha 37. So the bottom corner is PA 370077, and you've got increments in one decimal place and then increments in the next decimal place inside the grid squares. Get rid of that. There you go. Perfectly aligned with the DCS MGRS grid line, small grid over a real satellite image captured in the game, high resolution. You could even, if you wanted to, if you want to be even, if you start making this and you zoom in and you think, hey, look, I actually need, I need some even more detail of like this area. There is no reason you can't go back to DCS. Now you've done it. Go in, jump in here. Oh, that's a bit close. Let's just go here and there. Right, so we want a bit more detail of this area. DCS, and then just we could grab high res of that, go back to Photoshop, switch off our grid for a second if we want to, paste in our layer, put that down below the grid, and then again just literally and like I say, I'm quite sure Photoshop will do this. Edit, auto align, auto. Oh, interesting. Just having had lots of confidence. We'll might have to manually just scale this. This often happens when the scales are radically different and it can't work out where you've placed it. So, so let's just make these roughly the same size. Put them in roughly the right place. And there we go, auto aligned. So again, if you want to just check the with the difference blend mode, yeah, pretty black, perfect. And we can switch our grid back on if we wanted to. So if you once you've made your image, you're not committed at that point to with the grid over. You can go in and start paper macheing if you want more detail over stuff. You decided that wasn't enough. Well, hey, grab some higher res imagery and keep going if you want to. So you can see we could work down again if we wanted to. So once you've created this, you can start having your target at different resolutions, and also you can publish this. So there's no reason why you can't publish in your Intel documents or to your aircrew or JTAGs. Can't publish the whole thing. This is a big old file, right? You can see 300 megabytes compressed, 824 megabytes open. So this is a gigabyte PSD or like a 300 meg JPEG. But you could crop this down, put some white space around it, and put your labeling on as a master reference file, and then let people grab these high resolution areas. So there's no reason you couldn't have, a master reference top copy with these smaller bits that people could zoom in on and grab out if they needed to. Generally, that's a good way of storing a master Intel document that maybe you're using as the mission designer or like a planner's using. But generally what you want to give to the aircrew is the bits they actually need. So you'd give them just this. You'd take this top grid off. You'd go in here and then you'd clip this out, the bit that you wanted, either by cropping it in Photoshop and exporting, or just using a select tool and export, whatever you want to do, depends on your image editor program, and then do the labeling elsewhere. That's generally the easiest. But hopefully that gives you a quick way, like I say, of just going through and putting this together. Hope that helps.